我是炫。那我们今天呢要来讲的是第二单元第二 chapter 的故事啊。那如果呢你还没有如果呢你是第一次来到这个频道的话，记得订阅、按赞，帮我开启小铃铛哦。好，那我们就正式开始咯。Mr. Willy Wonka's Factory。好，那我们现在为大家，如果你是第一次来的话，我们来回顾一下第一章节我们在讲什么，好不好？第一章节呢，就是再简单讲一下 Charlie 他的身世。他呢之前呢发生了什么事啊？就是他们家其实真的是非常的穷，所以他们家也没有办法去拿他们吃的。然后呢，所以其实也是。对，他们住的家也只有2间房子而已。好，那我们就开始喽。In the evening, after he had finished his supper of buttery cabbage soup, Charlie always went into the room of his 4 grandparents to listen to their stories, and then afterwards to say goodnight. Every one of these old people was over 90. They were as swift as prunes and as bony as skeletons. And throughout the day, until Charlie made his appearance, they lay huddled in their bed, 2 each and with nightcaps on to keep their heads warm, dozing the time, always with nothing to do. But as soon as they heard the door opening and heard Charlie's voice saying, Good evening, Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine, Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina. Then all 4 of them would suddenly sit up, and then old wrinkled face would light up with smiles of pleasure, and the talking would begin. For they loved this little boy. He was the only bright things in their lives. And his evening visits were something they looked forward to all day long. Charlie's mother and father were coming as well, and stand by door listening to the story that the old people told, and plus for perhaps half an hour every night. This room would become a happy place, and the whole family would forget that they were hungry and poor. One evening when Charlie went in to see his grandparents, he said to them, "Is it really true that Wonka's factory is the chocolate factory is the biggest in the world?" "True!" cried all 4 of them at once. "Of course it's true! Good heavens! Didn't you know about that? It's about 50 times as big as any others." 一间巧克力工厂，你想啊，一间巧克力工厂盖50间巧克力工厂，这样排列或者堆高这样子，那就是 Mr. Willy Wonka 他的 chocolate factory 有多高了？太恐怖了！ "True!" cried all 4 of them at once. "Of course it's true." 我念过了。And is Mr. Willy Wonka really the cleverest chocolate maker in the world? Cleverest 就是 smartest 的意思，最聪明的。"My dear boy," said Grandpa Joe, raising him up a little higher on his pillow. "Mr. Willy Wonka is the most amazing, the most fantastic, the most extraordinary chocolate maker the world has ever seen. I thought everybody knew that." "I knew he was famous, Grandpa Joe, and I knew he was clever." "Clever!" cried the old man. "He's more than that. He's a magician with chocolate. He can make anything he wants. Isn't that a fact, my dears?" 真的 my dears 就是其他，我们就继续念下去。The other 3 old people nodded their heads slowly up and down and said, "Absolutely true. Just as true as it could be." 好，这边就写了，那 my dears 就是 the other 3 old people，OK？ 继续。 And Grandpa Joe said, "You mean to say I've never told you about Mr. Willy Wonka and his factory?" "Never," answered little Charlie. "Good heavens above, I don't know what's the matter with me." "Will you tell me now, Grandpa, please?" "I certainly will." Sit down beside me on the bed, my dear, and listen carefully. Grandpa Joe was the oldest of the 4 grandparents. He was 96 and a half, and that was just old as anyone could be. Like all me old people, he was delicate and weak, and throughout the day spoke very little. But in the evening, when Charlie, his beloved grandson, was in the room, he seemed a so marvelous boy to grow quite young again. All his tiredness fell away from him, and he became as eager and excited as a young boy. 这一大段呢，就表示了其实呢，他四个爷爷奶奶其实是非常的爱他的，只要有他，他们的任何疲劳都会忘在一头，来专心的跟这个 Charlie 讲故事。"Oh, what a man he is this Mr. Willy Wonka, Grandpa Joe? Did you know, for example, that he has himself invented more than 200 new kinds of candy bars, each with a different center, each far sweeter and creamier and more delicious than anything the other chocolate factories can make?" "Perfectly true," cried Grandma Josephine. "And he sends them to all the 4 corners of the earth. Isn't it so? Isn't that so, Grandpa Joe?" "It is, my dear, and to all the kings and presidents of the world as well. But it isn't only candy bars that he makes. Oh dear me, no. He has some really fantastic inventions up his sleeves." 好，我虽然还没有念完句子，但是呢，我呢来看这个 inventions 这一个字，这个呢就是创造、建造。Mr. Willy Wonka has. Did you know that he's invented a way of making chocolate ice cream so that it stays cold for hours and hours without being in the icebox? Did you know that he's invented a way of making chocolate ice cream so that it stays cold for hours and hours without being in the icebox? I didn't know that. It's a very good invention. You can even leave it lying in the sun all morning on head all day, and it won't go runny. 好，我为什么那么激动？就是它如果放在最热的太阳，它还是不会融化。"But that's impossible," said little Charlie, staring at his grandfather. "Of course it's impossible," cried Grandpa Joe. "It's completely absurd." "But Mr. Willy Wonka has done it." "Quite right," the others agreed, nodding their heads. "Mr. Wonka has done it." And then again, Grandpa Joe went on, speaking very slowly now so that Charlie wouldn't miss a word. "Mr. Willy Wonka can make marshmallow that stays a violet and rich caramels that change color every 10 seconds as you suck them, and little firmy sweets that melt away deliciously the moment you put them between your lips. He can make chewing gums that never lose its taste, and candy balloons that you can blow up enormously sized before you pop them with a pin and gobble them up. And by the most secret method, he can make lovely blue birds, eggs with black spots on them. And when you put one of these in your mouth, it gradually gets smaller and smaller until suddenly there is nothing left except a tiny little pink sugary baby bird sitting on the tip of your tongue. Grandpa Joe paused and ran to the point of his tongue, slowly over his lips. It makes my mouth water just thinking of it, he said. Mine too, said Charlie. But please go on. While they were talking, Mr. and Mrs. Bucket, Charlie's mother and father, had come quickly into the room, and now both were standing just inside the room, listening to the old people telling a story. Tell Charlie the crazy Indian prince, said Grandma Josephine. He'd like to hear that. You mean Prince Pondicherry? Said Grandpa Joe, and he began chuckling the laughter. Completely dotty, said Grandpa George, but very rich, said Grandma Georgina. What did he do? Asked Charlie eagerly. Listen, said Grandpa Joe, and I'll tell you. 好啦，这就是我们今天的第二 chapter 2的故事啊，大家还喜欢吗？那请在下面留言，那我们就下次见喽，拜拜。